Dementia Researcher with a blog and a rating.
Giving my first seminar was something that I've been nervous about since before I even started my PhD. But by the time I stood up to present, I realised that good preparation had transformed those nerves into excitement. Here are a few things that helped me prepare and ultimately enjoy the experience. If you're preparing to give your first seminar, I hope some of the things that helped me will help you too. When I was first asked to give a seminar, my immediate reaction wasn't excitement, it was panic. I wasn't worried about standing up in front of people so much as the thought that somebody would ask me a question that I couldn't answer, or that I'd discover I didn't know my own project as well as I thought I did. Looking back now, after giving my first seminar, I realised that I got it completely the wrong way round. The seminar wasn't a test of how much I knew. Instead, it became one of the best opportunities that I'd had to really understand my results. And I want to say that nerves aren't necessarily a bad thing. It's completely normal to have some nerves, and it shows that you really care about your work. At the point I gave my seminar, I was about a year into my PhD. Like many first-year PhD students, I'd been working on multiple aspects of my project at the same time. Although I knew each experiment well, I'd rarely stop to look at everything all together, and preparing my seminar really forced me to do exactly that. The first thing I did was bring all of my data so far together and get all of my figures in the same place. At first, I thought this was just another job on my to-do list. Instead, it turned out to be one of the most useful parts of the whole process. Seeing all of my results together really helped me appreciate how much progress I'd made in a year. And more importantly, it made me ask questions about the mechanisms underlying my results, and then reading the papers to find those answers really deepened my understanding around my data. As an unexpected bonus, it also gave me a real head start on writing my first year report, which was due a couple of months later. By organising the figures and then reviewing the literature, and also thinking about the narrative of my project, I'd already done much of the groundwork needed for writing it. The idea of telling a story was probably the biggest skill that I learnt. Research rarely happens in a neat, logical order. We repeat experiments, troubleshoot protocols, and sometimes spend weeks on something that doesn't work. Giving a seminar isn't a chronological order of your PhD. It's an opportunity to guide your audience through a scientific question, explain why it matters, and show how each experiment helps to answer it. Before I'd even opened PowerPoint, I spent time thinking about the story. I wrote down the background of my project, the gaps in current knowledge, and how each of my experiments contributed to answering those questions. Once I knew the story I wanted to tell, building the presentation became much easier. Researchers in our neuroscience department use a huge range of techniques. It was therefore important for me to take into consideration that not everybody in the audience will have carried out extracellular field recordings or whole cell patch clamp recordings. So explaining these complicated lab techniques, I feel, is an important part of being a researcher. And I found that being able to talk through how I take these electrophysiology recordings and what they allowed me to investigate extremely helpful for my own understanding too. One thing I also learned was that the less text I included on my slides, the more naturally I spoke. Rather than writing a script like I'd done in my undergraduate degree or using presenter mode, I became familiar with just talking through my figures. So when it came to giving the seminar, it allowed me to look around the room and speak to the audience directly in a much more engaging way. Of course, none of this happens without practice. This might sound obvious, but practice really is the key. My mum acts in pantomimes, and she always tells me to practice these things until I'm sick of them, and that's exactly what I did. By the time the seminar came around, I knew my slides and figures so well that I could just focus on speaking to the audience instead of worrying about what came next. Practicing out loud as much as I could was the most valuable thing I did. Presenting to friends and also to my lab group was a great way to build my confidence and also to get really helpful feedback on my presentation before the seminar. I think it's a really common view when starting your journey in academia, one that I certainly had, was that receiving questions at the end of a seminar can often mean criticism. But it's important to learn that questions don't necessarily mean criticism. On the contrary, it means that people are interested in your work, and the questions weren't there to catch me out. They were great opportunities for me to discuss my results, and some of the questions I received gave me a new perspective on my own experiments and made me think of things that I haven't thought about before. And I left the seminar with some great ideas for my future work. So, if you're about to give your first seminar, remember this: you don't need to know everything. None of us do. But if you've taken the time to understand your work, think carefully about the story you're telling, and prepare well, you'll probably discover what I did: that giving your first seminar is actually an enjoyable experience.
Thank you for listening. Join the Dementia Research bloggers and share your own views.